structure for any kind of chickens. And so we had to get rid of the chickens because we didn't want to go into a legal fight with them, coming down and trying to pick the property apart for any other code violations they could find in any obscure code. But the whole experience to us was like, they use these codes to dictate what type of lifestyle and the ability for us to basically produce, our own food, or at least a good portion of it. And so they're kind of forcing us into an economic system that we don't want to be a part of.
And they're doing that very purposefully, very deliberately.
Yeah, and you can talk, the things that require people to have lawns where they can grow fresh greens. You seem to have a lot of knowledge about, zoning as a lifestyle, I guess force. I don't know, what would you call it? I mean, forcing people to live a certain way?
Well, if you were to compare this country right now to, this country 115 years ago, you wouldn't call this country America. It wouldn't resemble anything that this country was founded upon, that was built upon, and that it was thriving upon. Mm-hmm. And that's all very deliberate. And I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about the many levels of, manipulation and conditioning and, rules and, legislation and, banking that are not only subtly but very profoundly affecting our everyday life. Mm-hmm. But really ultimately where I see the power is in keeping it simple. And there is law that exists in this country that is very simple. And the fact is that statutes and codes, they're actually there. They're there to govern fictional entities. They're there to govern entities in their official capacities. And it would take me a long time to really communicate how they've tricked the common man and woman into operating in that capacity. But the real truth is that we have God-given rights. We have birthrights. They're not given to us by a constitution. They're not given to us by a government. They're not given to us by government officials. They're birthrights. We're born with them. And there is law in this land to serve, protect, and uphold those birthrights. And those birthrights allow us on our own piece of land to do whatever we want, as long as we're not hurting somebody. As long as we're not hindering their lifestyle, as long as we're not interfering with their way of life, then we are doing no crime. So that's very simple stuff. And, we're in city limits of Arlington. And, a lot of what we're doing is not up to code. But we're able to do it anyways because we use the law. We proved on record that they don't have the authority or the jurisdiction to enforce the codes or the statutes upon us because those codes and those statutes are in disregard and or are actually in direct conflict with our birthrights. And so they become void ab initio. So we've used this law very successfully for, quite a good period of time now to do whatever we want on our land, despite their codes and their statutes. And, they sort of contrived this whole, drug trafficking scam as a way to justify them forcing their way onto our land and, trying to destroy us.
Yeah, what I found really interesting about the story wasn't as much the raid, because unfortunately that's going on so often, we hear so much, was the backstory of how this started via the conflict in codes. Now, what exactly were they citing you with, and what were the supposed violations?
Well, they've cited a lot of violations. Improperly stacked wood, long grasses, indoor furniture that's outdoors,
Mm-hmm.
Generally unclean premises, mechanical parts, in uncovered areas. They've cited a lot of stuff over time, but our whole point the whole time has been is that, this isn't about whether we're violating the codes or not. What this is about is, do the codes actually have any jurisdiction here? And do you actually have any authority to enforce them? That's been the whole issue. We're not here to argue whether we're in violation or not. We're here to challenge the jurisdiction. And that's where the real power is, because they have to establish on record jurisdiction before they have any authority. And if they don't establish that jurisdiction, then they don't have any authority. Because all government officials, they have limited delegated authority. And that authority only comes into play when, something happens that, gives them that authority. So, for example, if you're, driving your car like a really good slave, in between the lines, you've got your registration, there's nothing wrong with your car, you put your blinkers on, your headlights work, you're not going to get pulled over. But if you're driving and you swerve the line, that police officer, all of a sudden, their limited delegated authority pops in. That was out of the line. Now I have power to pull you over and investigate what you're doing. Right? So they think that, the certain codes and statutes is that red light. Is that swerving between the lines, which gives them that limited delegated authority, but we don't. We disagree. And so what we've done is we've challenged the jurisdiction. We're not going to argue, we're not going to fight whether there is violation or not. That's completely besides the point. To us, what the point is do you actually even have any authority whatsoever to enforce, and or do these statutes and codes actually have any authority over us whatsoever to be enforced? So,
well, that brings up a question to me then. How would you propose someone enforcing, say if you've got a guy who's like just pouring nuclear waste into a hole in the ground in his backyard? Obviously that's not going to be good for his neighbors or the town or wherever.
Right. Well, that's very you can very easily prove that. You can very easily prove that on record in a court of law as harming your life, as being harmful to your path of happiness, your spiritual path, your path of well-being, for you being secure in your land, because you can pull up scientific studies that show that nuclear waste has an X amount of radius of effect over an X amount of time, and you can prove that it's going to be something that's going to affect you. And if you can prove that in a court of law, then what you're doing is you as a free man are bringing claims of damages against another man. And so that's totally legit. That's totally legit. We're not saying we can do whatever we want. We're saying we can do whatever we want as long as we don't harm or hinder somebody else's God-given rights. So we all have, it only works if we all have the rights. It can't be like, oh, well, we have the rights, but you don't have the rights. We're all born equal, right? These truths are held as self-evident. We're all born equal, and we all have these rights at birth, given to us by God, by our Creator. And we have the power of the Creator. So, if we as free men and women, with our right to free will, if we make choices that harm somebody, well, number one, it is possible that, someone makes a mistake, meaning they weren't doing it maliciously, it was a mistake. So ideally, in an honorable society, whatever neighbor felt like they were being harmed, ideally they would come to their neighbor, right? They would go to their brother, right? And this is the way it would work in an honorable society. You would go to that person, you would say, look, I have a problem with this. This is how it's affecting me. This is why it's negatively affecting me. This is why I have a problem with it. And ideally, if it was a mistake, that person would be like, oh, I didn't realize that was even happening. I didn't even realize that was going on, or I didn't realize that was affecting you in that way. of course, I will do something to make sure that that no longer happens. And then it's resolved. You don't even need to go to court. You don't even need to go to the police, right? Because two honorable individuals come together and they have a conversation and there's resolution.
Yeah,
right?
It would have been nice if someone would have come to us about our chickens and just said, keep them off our porch. But that's kind of like where we've gotten to in a lot of places in America where we're neighbors with people and we're calling the police on each other over a chicken.
Right, which, again, and this is what shows you, which is my bigger point here, is that, obviously, the government is overstepping its bounds big time. Obviously, people are terrified of the government, which is tyranny, which is not freedom. The majority consensus of the whole population of the United States thinks, and if you do a poll of this, you'll find this everywhere you go, that the government can do whatever it wants, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's pretty much what everybody thinks to be the standard truth. And that's a big problem. But the bigger problem, that's a huge problem. But there's a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is that we, the people, are the power. See, we, the people, are the power. We always have been. We always have been. That hasn't changed. So what that means is that we, the people, are the problem. We're the problem. We have the power, and therefore we are the problem. Now what that means is that we are also the solution. We're also the solution. But if we can't even go to our neighbor, and say, I don't like it when your chickens hop over my fence and eat my cat food, right? If your neighbor can't come to you and say that, there's no possible way that they can ever go to the government and say, hey, I don't like it when you, raid my land with a SWAT team.
Sure.
Right? So what I'm saying is that the reason why the government is the way it is because the people have brought it to this point. We, the people, are the power. We, the people, are the power. We, the people, created the government for the people, by the people, for the people. Right? And we created a system that kept the people protected on purpose. And we put lots of rules, lots of regulations on those government officials. That's why all government officials must sign under oath. They sign, swear, and attest to, under penalty of perjury, that they will serve and protect the people and the Constitution of the United States. Right? We made them do that on purpose because there's no room for error when you give somebody a gun and limited delegated authority. They've got to be 100% accountable. So what that means is that in the olden days, if a government official perjured their oath, they went to jail or they were hung. They died. Treason and perjury are potentially, death penalty crimes. Now, the real truth is that most government officials perjure their oath on a daily basis. They perjure their oath on a daily basis, and it's not even looked at. It's not enforced, and that's a big problem. But whose problem is it? It's the people's problem. The people are doing nothing about it, and the only reason it's got this way is because the people have allowed it to get this way. So what has to happen is that there has to be an awakening of the people. The people have to wake up. And what that means is that people like me need to be heard. Organizations like what we're doing here needs to be seen. People need to wake up and see that it is actually possible to live a responsible and honorable life, and what that looks like. That it's possible to live a healthy and free life, and what that actually looks like. People talk about freedom in the land of the free, but they actually have no comprehension of what it is whatsoever because they were born into slavery.
How would you describe freedom as perpetrated by Eden Gardens and what you guys do?
Well, freedom is that we're all kings and queens of our own domain. We make up all our own rules. As long as we don't hurt somebody, we get to make up whatever rules we want. We get to live any way we choose. We are the kings and queens of our own kingdom. We choose. We decide. We live according to our spiritual path, according to our pursuit